Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be invited as one of the guests in this Anthro-in-Action speaker series. And I'd like to thank my good friend Kevin for having me here and for organizing this. And of course, to all of you for taking the time to watch this. I wish we could have a more dynamic and engaging conversation, like a two-way exchange of ideas instead of just me talking to you right now. But it is what it is. So I'll just do my best to make this monologue as interesting as possible for you. And if you ever have any questions or comments, please feel free to shoot me an email. So, just a little bit of a background. I am Deanna and I am from the Philippines. I just came here in 2018 to pursue my master's in sociocultural anthropology with a focus on disability studies. And originally, I wanted to do a cross cultural comparison between the disability communities in Canada and the Philippines. But as I prepare for my research project, I have had some interesting and memorable encounters with fellow Filipinos who happen to be working in disability service agencies. So, with the help and guidance of my supervisor, I shifted my focus on the friendship and inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities and immigrant care workers, which we will or I will be talking about today, as well as some anthropological concepts that relate to this project. Okay, so before I begin to bore you with my project, here's a question that I'd like you to think about or keep at the back of your mind as we go through the presentation. So, what does it mean to belong to a community? Where do you find your sense of belonging? Or how do you identify with your community or communities? And what is it that makes you feel included, secured, and valued? So, I just like you to think about these questions as I present some of my reflections and findings from my research. And as well, I just wanted to flag some notes on the language that I use here. So, as you noticed in the title, I used the person first language by saying people with intellectual disabilities. So, there has been an enduring debate about the identity first and the person first language in the disability community. So, the person first language is built on the premise that we should recognize the person as a whole rather than reducing their identity to their disability. So, in this case, it is more preferable to say person with disability than disabled person. In contrast, the identity first argument asserts that disability is not something that is simply added onto one's um, identity as if it's a negative characteristic that can be separated from the person. So, by using this term, disabled person, we recognize that their disability is integral to their person. And although impairments can put some limitations, ultimately it is the inaccessibility of society that disables them. Well, ideally, I would have asked the people directly how they identify themselves. However, for this project, I find that it is not possible to do so for two reasons. First, because I am interviewing the disability support staff, and second, many of the clients are nonverbal. So I decided to use the default language commonly used by members of the community, which is the people first language. As well, I also have some notes about immigrant and migrant, which I use interchangeably here in this presentation since most of my interviews started through the live-in caregiver program of Canada. And while most of them already got their permanent residence and considered like immigrants, their the experiences they've shared during the interviews when I conducted them go back to when they were still holding temporary visas as temporary workers. So, thus, migrants and immigrants are used interchangeably here in this context to describe care workers who moved out from their country of origin for employment. And finally, before I go to the next slide, I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the positionality of the researcher. So, this is something that I really find important too when you try or whatever you do some anthropological or research in general, because sometimes, in an effort to be as objective as possible with this myth of objectivity, researchers often try to eliminate personal reflections in the process of writing and presenting their work, fearing it will dominate the discussion and supersede the actual research topic. But according to Valerie Yo, I could share some of these readings with you later on. That by in doing so, scholars are actually leaving a substantial gap in the research process, which is crucial for the readers to understand what influenced the research and their interpretation. So, these subjectivities are actually beneficial when researchers become more aware of their motivations in choosing, say, the topic and recognize how their class, gender, age, race, and other aspects of one's identities affect the relationship with the interviewees, as well as the entire research process. So, as I go along later on, you might hear some of my reflections and experiences in doing this project and how my identity and positionality shape these interpretations. Okay, so next, before we proceed, I guess it's no surprise to anybody who's read early ethnographies that most of the anthropological studies are focused on the other. So, in anthropology, early in the days, we have been so obsessed with what Toyo termed as the savage slot, or the study of the other outside the West, which I believe is a fairly common theme until the late 1980s. So back then, we could rarely see anthropologists doing research in their own communities. It should always be like halfway across the world. You should be immersed in a community that is completely different from your own. That way, you can easily grasp how others live their lives. And along these lines are the assumption that people who are considered other outside the West share a common human nature with people in the West. And so, like people in the West who have presumably improved ahead of them, these other people could also become like the people in the West. And this reinforces the assumption that we were all moving to the same linear trajectory of this human development. So this idea of otherness or othering doesn't only apply to two different cultural contexts, for example, like the West versus the South. Othering can also occur even within the society. And this idea of otherness is crucial in understanding the construction of majority and minority identities. So often, groups that hold more power and privilege tends to determine the status of other groups in the society. But anyway, in the 1980s, anthropology has shifted its focus from societies defined as completely different or societies defined as the other, and it has shifted to their own communities. While it is still uncertain about who or what might replace the other as the object of anthropological studies at that time, Joel Robbins believed it has been replaced with what he calls the suffering slot, or the suffering subject, and this is where he started conceptualizing the anthropology of the good, which I use in my own project to look at to explore how immigrant disability support workers facilitate friendship formation and inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. So within this framework, Robbins highlighted how contemporary anthropological studies represent suffering to build an empathetic connection to the readers, hoping it will be an impetus to social change. And personally, I can definitely agree to this. Like, looking back in my undergrad years in anthropology as well, most, if not all, ethnographic work that I've read tend to focus on the suffering of the people. And like maybe after all, who wants to read about all the good things about a certain society, right? I mean, it's not like nobody wants to read the good news. It's just that probably stories of struggles and suffering create more impact on the readers. And while these stories of struggles are important in raising awareness and social justice, Robbins also argued that this creates a risk of flattening multifaceted experiences as mere stories of suffering. So, to quote him, he says here that it is my hope that an anthropology of the good can take up that project, helping us do, sorry, excuse me, helping us do justice to the different ways people live for the good and finding ways to let their efforts inform our own. So, the point of developing this new kind of anthropology would not be to displace the anthropology of suffering, which will continue for the foreseeable future to address problems we need to face. it would be to help realize in a distinctively anthropological way the promise suffering slot anthropology always at least implicitly makes, and that is that there must be better ways to live than the ones it documents. So I find this approach relevant to my project mainly because immigrant disability support workers and adults with intellectual disabilities are among the population who belong to the suffering slot in anthropology. And I believe that the stories of these marginalized communities I have worked with are not just stories of struggles and sufferings. Their experiences are intricately intertwined with stories of success, joy, resilience, and even resistance. So, within this framework, instead of approaching disability as an attribute attached only to what Robbins Riley calls as suffering subjects, I use it to look at the dynamics of the relationship between immigrant disability support workers and people with intellectual disabilities as an inevitable element in complex community building. So next, when it comes to discussion of friendships, well, apart from family and romantic partners, friends or friendships are the most important social relationships an individual can have. And when we are happy, we celebrate with friends. And when we're sad or miserable, we seek comfort from our friends, right? Although we might not be fully conscious of the role it plays in our lives, friends are one of the most important sources of fulfillment and foundation for a well lived life. Sorry. However, looking from an anthropological perspective, despite the universality of friendship across cultures, anthropologists tended to put friendship studies in the periphery until recently. And scholars link this relative lack of attention to friendship to anthropologists' emphasis on kinship and its role in structuring traditional societies. Additionally, the fluidity and scope the wide scope of the definition of friendship in various cultural contexts have made it more difficult for scholars to study it across cultures or across different contexts. But to date, there has been a growing literature on friendships, although none of these studies have thoroughly examined the role of friendships in helping modern societies to hear. And that was what I was interested when I was thinking about this project. Anyway, the first proposition of friendship conceptualizes it as a kind of relationship deeply embedded in Western notions of individual autonomy. So, in this case, scholars view friendship as a product of capitalist transformation in social and moral codes that separate individuals from society into private or public spheres. So, in this sense, friendship is construed as a voluntary relationship based on spontaneous and constrained sentiment between two autonomous individuals in a private domain. Sorry. Furthermore, this also scholars who support this conception believes that friendship can only develop between two social equals who can reciprocate without any material interference. Conversely, the second proposition views friendship as a form of social relatedness present in all societies. So it is seen as a social process that occurs within historical and cultural context. So that means friendship can have different models and practices, and it's difficult to offer a single and all-encompassing definition of friendship. So, according to scholars who follow this tradition, they are more inclined to invite an open and multiple definitions of friendships, since, quote, relationships of friendship do not necessarily map neatly onto local conceptions of kin and non-kin. So, this view argues that any definition of friendship must allow for cross-cultural variations. And in this project, in my own research, I explored the concept of friendship in the broadest sense. That is, it is not primarily considered as kinship. And instead of exploring this term through the lens of existing categories of what or what's not a friendship, I rely on my interviews' definitions of friendship in different social contexts. Okay. So when it comes to the concept of othering and belonging, for the first one, several studies have shown that people with intellectual disabilities face more challenges forming and maintaining friendships compared to people without disabilities. Due to this limited social network, most people with intellectual disabilities consider their paid staff to be their friends. However, while these friendships between staff and clients have considerable mutual benefits, some scholars argue that paid relationships cannot be considered as real friendships. And this argument assumes that friendships can only ever be private arrangements, and thus, when money enters the picture, the private arrangement turns into business. So that's one of the challenges for people with intellectual disabilities when it comes to friendships. Similarly, most of the immigrant care workers that I've interviewed for these projects reported experiences of discrimination and isolation due to their limited social networks and opportunities to socialize. Care workers also reported that people thought less of their job and assumed they were simply bringing their clients to malls and recreational centers as if their job is like a walk in the park. So, this lack of appreciation contributes to the exclusion of immigrant care workers. And considering that most of them are migrants and women of color, there is a constant feeling of otherness among them. So most of them find themselves entangled with what was called the matrix of oppression, in which their class, race, gender, and status, and other social constructed categories of difference put them, especially women of color like them, at a great disadvantage. This has also been supported by other studies that shows dominant groups are likely to put minority populations under increased scrutiny, surveillance, and isolation due to their perceived difference and otherness. So in this case, these women of color who are working as care workers in Canada. And these sentiments were constantly brought up by the care workers themselves, whom I've interviewed, and that they were feeling always very cautious with every single move, since they felt that even briefly checking their phones when they're accompanying their clients to their medical appointments or recreational activities could be taken against them. So that most of them have this feeling of heightened visibility and at the same time invisibility, which makes their sphere or work environments hostile for them, for their population as immigrant care workers. So other I remember one employer also shared, when it comes to discussions of friendships, that forming friendships was also difficult even for non-disabled people like her. It's because she has limited knowledge of the area, she's adjusting to the environment, and she doesn't have the necessary support or like the social network that she had back home. And additionally, given the nature of their job as care workers and responsibilities at hand, socializing with other people often becomes a luxury they cannot afford. So, this isolating nature of their job and extended hours at work makes it just to make ends meet, makes it difficult for them to socialize outside of their work and make new friends. So, this limited social network and support systems for both people with intellectual disabilities and immigrant care workers actually paved the way for friendships to flourish between them, which serves to debunk the argument that friendships cannot exist within the paid support relationship, or like between employee and employer, or like staff and client. In this sense, genuine relationships with staff and clients were considered important friendships for their clients, especially those with limited communication abilities. So eventually, paid staff became close peers and a constant source of emotional and social support for nonverbal individuals. And most of my interviews said that most of their clients also, since they had limited communication abilities and often express themselves non-verbally, finding ways to effectively communicate took time. So care workers needed to know their clients better to understand their likes and dislikes. And most of them share that hang out with their clients frequently allow them to understand their preferences and communication cues. So in this way, for me, developing and maintaining friendships for a verbal for people who are able to communicate verbally is already difficult. In this sense, it makes the situation even more challenging when the individual is nonverbal and could only communicate through other avenues or other things. So in this way, it's their paid staff that becomes their close friends because they hang out most of the time. This paid staff can eventually learn the likes and dislikes, the preferences of their clients. And so this friend related relationship starts to flourish between them. And most care workers believe that without friendship and genuine affection, they would act indifferent towards their clients. Most of them would share like they might just like not care as much about their clients' happiness or well-being as long as they've already successfully performed their daily tasks. However, this based on the relationships that I've I've gotten to know of when they were sharing these stories with me, I feel like these are the types of relationship that go beyond like the accomplishing daily tasks, but it's more of like staff tend to care more about their clients in a friendly and genuine way that they consider their job is more than just preferring performing the daily task of taking their clients, but they also want to see to it that their clients at least have like a good quality of life, and that's and by keeping them company or acting as their friends, they were able to help improve this the quality of life of their clients. So, in order for the disability support workers to also teach their clients how to make friends in the community, they model such interactions. So, in some days, they acted and talked to their clients as if they are friends. And some find it really very helpful, especially for those clients who are not very exposed outside of their like families or communities. So it helps them learn how to socialize with other people, especially when they get to meet them for the first time. Anyway, so people with disabilities relied on their care workers for physical and social support, but care workers also depended on their clients for emotional support. So migrant care workers were, since most of them came here on a temporary status, were also separated from their family and friends. Thus, in times of emotional distress, most of them turn to their clients to seek comfort because they're the ones who are spending spending time together most of the time, since care workers tend to work more than the 8 hours that that regular or other people do. So while they facilitated the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities, these care workers also shared that they also struggled with social isolation. And this was due in part of the undervalued importance of care work, which reflected the lower wages of disability support workers, which, like I mentioned earlier, eventually led to working extended hours just to make ends meet. So, as a result, migrant care workers rarely got time to maintain a social life and expand their network. And this lack of social support system has been documented to greatly affect immigrant women's well-being, in addition to the struggle of securing jobs in gendered and racialized job markets. So I've summarized some of the reflections that I caught, or like the basic the key takeaways from this research that I conducted. So first, I categorized them into three. First, we have developing friendships, the barriers to friendships, and challenges in care work. So since most of the clients of the immigrant care workers that I've interviewed are nonverbal and have limited ability to socialize without their support. Much of them actually sometimes worry that they are the only ones keeping the friendships together. But at the same time, friendships between staff and clients are common, yet others are reluctant to call it friendships to maintain professional boundaries as emphasized by their employers. So some disability service agencies emphasize like clear and strict boundaries, while others are also encouraging positive and friendly relationships between clients and staff because they believe it helps the client get used to socializing with other people. However, yeah, it depends on their employees' rules and like regulations in place whether the clients and staff can be friends or not. As well, the frequency of meeting of people going to the same program arranged by service agencies allowed people to get to know each other and friendships between client and staff to flourish. So aside from reaching out to people or actually approaching people to try to make friends with, immigrant care workers that I interviewed found that context and environment are very important in developing friendships, not just for their clients but for them. Most of them find their social support network right now through the activities that they always go to, like the regular day programs, the regular activities or recreational activities that they attended. So whenever people go, say for example, one person go here like every Monday, and they get to meet this same person who goes to the same activity every Monday, and the frequency and like the environment that they are in at that time allowed for some friendships or like good relationships to start developing between them. And when it comes to barriers to friendship, as I mentioned, some of the clients of the interviewees have like limited communication abilities and behavioral problems that make it challenging for them to socialize with other people. So some clients get triggered with huge crowds, which limit their opportunities of meeting others in the community. And consequently, this also restricts the care worker's chance to socialize since the individual is not comfortable around unfamiliar people. And another barrier that often comes up in the interviews is the public attitudes towards people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So, care workers emphasize the difference between tolerance and acceptance. For instance, they share that once they were allowed to go to a specific recreation center, but none of the people there are talking to them. So they kind of think we need more work to do when it comes to breaking down stereotypes and accepting people with disabilities. And finally, one of the barriers that often comes up in this project is the employer's protocol and restrictions that can also impede an individual's socialization. So while rules are placed to ensure the safety of an individual, support workers also expressed it involves several trial and error experiments. So this is where the support workers introduce the activity or place to the client and observe through their nonverbal cues and behavior whether it's appropriate or it's something that their client likes. And for some clients who are nonverbal, immigrant care workers tend to observe through their nonverbal cues and behavior whether it's something that they'd like to do again the next time. However, some parents, if they are directly employed by the families, aren't that open with the idea of bringing their children to public spaces. And some organizations as well, like disability service organizations who employ these care workers, require loads of paperwork and bureaucratic processes before an individual can participate in a specific activity. So while facilitating the inclusion of or trying to build a social network or trying to increase the exposure of their client involves a lot of trial and error activities, Most of the care workers find that these barriers delay or impedes the socialization of their clients. And finally, when it comes to their own experiences as care workers, since most of them are overwhelmingly women and disproportionately immigrant women, as they facilitate the inclusion of their clients, they too experience social isolation and difficulties adjusting to the new environment. So, most of the immigrant care workers express the importance of being fully adjusted and familiar to the new environment. So, and before they can actually take out their clients and help them build their own social network or like their social circle. So apart from the behavior and unique needs of every client, interviewees also and my interviews also shared that the struggles of dealing with employers, colleagues, and community in general is one of the most difficult aspects of their job. So often they act as a buffer between their clients and the public. And as a migrant, this lack of social network and weak support system here in Canada make it harder for them to deal with these challenges. And on top of the emotional stress, care workers, especially those living with their employers, share that the lack of clear job description, which results in task overload and working beyond the regular hours without pay, also contribute to their challenges, to the challenges they experience. As well, the invisibility of migrant care workers, which has been widely documented in like care work literature, um, sh- uh, this contributes to their feeling of being undervalued and invisible in the society unless they commit mistakes, which other researchers term as hypervisibility. This is this happens when um, this person's visibility in the heightened visibility occurs for this person when they commit mistakes. So care workers, at least the ones that I've interviewed, express feelings of this hypervisibility or increased surveillance, especially when they are out in the community with the people they support. And as most of them also felt that the general public are expecting too much from them and making them wholly responsible for the individuals they are supporting. So these are one of the most pressing challenges that they encounter working in the care industry. So when it comes to the discussion of inclusion, while some people think like building ramps and removing physical barriers would immediately lead to inclusion, I have argued in this research that inclusion does not simply mean presence in the community. And as Stanton argues, lobbying, advocacy, and political action may result in the realization of formal citizenship, but inclusion is something that cannot be legislated. And so care workers and the people they support needed a genuine social network to ensure they have access to opportunities to form friendships and participate in meaningful social activities. In the same way, Reindeers believes that it is not only citizenship but also friendship that matters. Sorry, I've been dropping names, but I will surely include this to the list of reading materials that you can further read if you're interested in this topic. So, anyway, for both people with intellectual disabilities and care workers, inclusion will remain elusive and problematic without supported social networks, since, again, as stated, argues, inclusion is something that must be felt rather than enforced. Anyway, so to close this presentation, I would say that in this project, I was able to demonstrate that friendly relationships paved the way for healthier and more genuine interactions between people. Through friendship, care workers and care recipients or clients develop interdependence with one another, and this interdependence is crucial to their well-being and sense of belonging. So the lack of an established support system paved the way for friendships that later turned into flourishing community ties. And additionally, the weak ties within families of both the clients and the care workers appear to have contributed to a special bond and genuine connection that formed between them. So, this study in general contributed to the limited friendship studies and to the new understandings of the role of friendships in contemporary everyday life. So, in contrast to the assumption that friendships within the paid care setting cannot be genuine, argued that friendly aspect and affection put into this work were very important in fostering the sense of belonging and community building. So I would I've found out based on this research that friendship among care workers and clients did not impede the provision of high quality care. Rather, it provided opportunities for the care workers to deeply understand their clients. As well, friendships lessen the feeling of isolation and improve staff retention. So, most of the care workers I've interviewed, despite the challenges that they encounter working in the care industry, most of them hesitate to leave their job because of the positive relationship that they've built with their clients, which is one of the most important and irreplaceable things that's part of their work. Because even if a new care worker comes in, the relationship and the dynamics wouldn't be the same as what they've already built with this person who has been working with them for some time. Anyway, so using the anthropology of the good framework, I would conclude that despite the challenges that these two disadvantaged groups, people with intellectual disabilities and immigrant care workers, developed interdependence and found ways to create their community and sense of belonging. And in this sense, I suggest that care could be used as the foundation of friendships between clients and staff. And this is crucial in fostering a sense of belonging as the social organization of as contemporary societies transform. Because if we are to look into this, the way traditional societies were structured before is based on like kinship or like the family as the central unit of each society. But right now, like we have weaker family ties. Most of them we are separated from their families, and so the way the way our society is organized is not the same as it was back then in traditional societies. So I contend that while inclusion and friendship are something that cannot be legislated, it could also help us raise awareness in promoting understanding of people in marginalized groups, especially people with intellectual disabilities and immigrant care workers, so that in a way, this could help break down the stereotypes. Sorry, excuse me. And by recognizing the value of care work, this will help reshape the public's perspective and attitude towards underserved groups such as those with intellectual disabilities. So, finally, service agencies can also learn from this from the results of this research to recognize the importance of genuine relationships in the paid care setting and to better communicate and support care workers to ensure a higher quality of care. Overall, I would say that this project offers a tangible set of practices to better support care workers and people with intellectual disabilities. And because friendship played a key role in sustaining the paid care and will continue to play an important role in making our modern societies go here, I would suggest in this research that as budding scholars and anthropologists, we might want to better understand friendship and look deeper into the role of friendship in the current transformations that are happening in modern societies like Canada and beyond. So I guess that concludes my presentation. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at neri@ualberta.ca. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and good luck on your class, or like as the no, it's not the end of the term yet. But yes, thank you so much. Bye.